Charles sat behind his expansive mahogany desk, the late afternoon sun pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his opulent office. The view overlooked the city he had conquered, a sprawling metropolis filled with glistening skyscrapers that mirrored his success. He leaned back in his leather chair, a smug smile playing on his lips as he spoke to a small group of equally wealthy friends gathered around him. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the soft murmur of laughter. But Charles's voice rose above the rest, filled with the confidence of a self-made millionaire. "Let me tell you," Charles proclaimed, gesturing animatedly, "money can solve any problem. Look at my latest venture, the tech startup I invested in. In less than a year, we've tripled our valuation. It's all about knowing how to play the game." His friends nodded in agreement, their eyes shimmering with admiration and envy. One of them, Mark, a tall man with slicked back hair and a penchant for expensive suits, leaned in closer, a teasing glint in his eyes. "But Charles, can money really solve everything? I mean, what about love? Can you buy that?" Charles chuckled, enjoying the banter. "Love? That's easy. You just need to find the right partner. And let's face it, most people will do anything for a little financial security. A little cash can make anyone fall in love with you." The group erupted in laughter, but Mark wasn't done. He raised an eyebrow and leaned back in his chair, a challenge forming on his lips. "How about this, Charles? I bet you couldn't marry someone deemed unworthy, like a homeless woman. Show us that your money can truly conquer all." Silence enveloped the room for a moment, the absurdity of the idea sinking in. Charles's smile widened, his competitive spirit ignited. "You're on, Mark. I'll marry the first homeless woman I see. I'll prove that with enough money I can change her life and mine." The words tumbled out before he could fully grasp their implications, but the thrill of the challenge sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. His friends erupted in cheers and playful jeers, their laughter echoing against the polished walls. Charles reveled in their approval, his mind racing with the possibilities. He envisioned the headlines, "Self-made millionaire marries homeless woman," a love story for the ages. This would be a game, a demonstration of his power and wealth, and he would emerge victorious. The next day, Charles strode through the bustling streets, the weight of his designer shoes echoing confidently against the pavement. He felt a sense of superiority as he scanned the sidewalks, spotting the disheveled figures huddled on corners and near storefronts. The sun beat down mercilessly, yet he remained unfazed, his mind solely focused on the challenge ahead. He chuckled to himself, the thought of finding his bride among the homeless only fueling his arrogance. "Look at these people," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "It's almost too easy." He imagined himself picking a woman who would fit the stereotype perfectly, someone he could mold into a trophy wife, a pawn in his grand game. As he turned a corner, he spotted her, a woman sitting against the wall of a coffee shop, her clothes tattered and her hair unkempt. She had a fierce look in her eyes, a glimmer of defiance that intrigued him. Her name was Clara, though he didn't know it yet. Her presence challenged his expectations of what he considered unworthy. Most would have overlooked her, but Charles felt a spark of excitement. This could be the perfect opportunity to prove a point. He approached her, a smirk plastered on his face. "Excuse me," he said, feigning a polite tone, "but I'm looking for someone special. How would you like to get married?" Clara looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "Married? You must be joking. What do you want with me?" Her voice was steady, laced with a hint of incredulity. Charles chuckled, his confidence unwavering. "I'm serious. I'm making a bet, and you could make me a very rich man." He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "All I need is a willing participant. I'll take care of everything. Money, a place to stay, you name it." She studied him, her brow furrowing as she tried to gauge his intentions. "And what's in it for me? You think I'm just going to marry you for the sake of your little game?" "Why not?" he shot back, a smirk still plastered on his face. "You don't have much to lose, do you? I can offer you a way out of this life, a chance to start fresh." Clara frowned, the weight of his words sinking in. She had lived on the streets long enough to know that offers like this usually came with strings attached. "And what makes you think I'd want to be a part of your twisted little bet?" Charles shrugged, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Look, I don't expect you to understand, but trust me, it'll be beneficial for both of us. You'll get money, and I'll win my bet. Simple as that. Clara crossed her arms, her fierce spirit igniting a fire within her. You think you can just waltz in here and play with my life like I'm some kind of trophy? I'm not a pawn in your game, mister. He was taken aback by her resolve, momentarily silenced. The woman before him was not what he had expected. She was fierce, resilient, and far from the meek figure he had envisioned. He had approached her with the intention of showcasing his power, but she seemed to hold her ground in a way that intrigued him. "Okay," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "I see you're not easily swayed. But think about it. You could have a real chance at a better life. No more living on the streets, I can give you that. Just say yes and I promise I'll take care of you." Clara hesitated, the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her. She longed for a way out, but the thought of being part of Charles's cruel game filled her with dread. She had spent years fighting for her dignity, and the idea of being reduced to a mere bet was infuriating. "Why should I trust you?" she finally replied, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "You don't even know me. You see me as a project, an experiment. I won't be a part of that." Charles opened his mouth to argue, but paused. He could see the fire in her eyes, the strength that belied her situation. "You're right, I don't know you, but that's exactly why I'm here. I want to change that," he said, his tone softening slightly. "You could teach me something about resilience, and in return I can offer you a chance to escape this life. Just think about it." Clara studied him for a long moment, weighing her options. The streets had been unforgiving, and the thought of a better life was tempting. But the price of her dignity weighed heavily on her mind. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice firm. "But don't expect me to just roll over and play along with your game. I won't be your pawn." With that, she turned away, leaving Charles standing there, a mix of frustration and admiration swirling within him. He had underestimated her, and for the first time, he felt a flicker of uncertainty about the bet he had so eagerly accepted. Clara stood on the sidewalk, the cool breeze brushing against her skin, causing her to shiver slightly. She looked up at Charles, who was casually leaning against his expensive car, a smirk plastered across his handsome face. The contrast between them was stark. He was the embodiment of wealth and privilege, while she was a woman whose life had been reduced to the streets. The offer he had just made hung in the air, heavy with implications. "Why would you want to marry me?" Clara's voice wavered, filled with uncertainty. She felt a mix of anger and confusion swirling inside her. "You don't even know me." Charles chuckled, a dismissive sound that grated on her nerves. "Oh, come on, Clara. This is just a fun little arrangement, a marriage of convenience, if you will. Think of it as a ticket to a better life." He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "And I'm willing to give you a substantial sum of money for your cooperation. You could finally get off the streets." Clara's heart raced at the mention of money. She had spent countless nights shivering in alleyways, her stomach often growling for food. The thought of having a roof over her head and food to eat was undeniably enticing. Yet she knew this was not just a simple transaction. It was a mockery of everything she stood for. "Why me?" she pressed, trying to understand the absurdity of it all. "Why not choose someone else? You could easily find a woman from your world, someone who fits your standards." "Because it's a bet," he said, his tone cocky, as if that explained everything. "I need to prove a point to my friends that money can win over any obstacle, even love. And let's be honest, you're the perfect candidate." Clara felt a rush of indignation at his words. He was treating her like a pawn in his game, a mere statistic in his quest to prove a point. "You think I'm just some charity case," she spat, her voice rising. "I'm not your experiment, Charles. I'm a person, not a bet." He held up his hands in defense, feigning innocence. "I didn't mean it like that. Look, I'm offering you a way out. You can have all the things you've ever wanted. Just say yes." Clara's mind raced as she weighed her options. The allure of a stable life was powerful, but the thought of binding herself to someone so arrogant felt like a betrayal to herself. "What happens after? When your bet is over?" Charles smirked again, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "We'll get a divorce. Simple as that. You'll have your money and I'll have my victory. Everyone wins." The simplicity of his answer made Clara's stomach turn. "And what if I don't want to be part of your game?" "Then you can go back to your life on the streets," he replied, his voice dripping with nonchalance. "But think about it. You could make a difference with that money. Help people like you, right?" His words hung in the air and Clara felt the weight of them. She thought about the other homeless people she had met, the stories they shared, the dreams they once had. "You're right," she said quietly. "I could help others, but I won't be your pawn." "Then let's make this a win-win situation," he said, his tone shifting to one of persuasion. "You get to help others, and I get to win this bet. It's not like you have any other options." As much as she wanted to refuse him, Clara felt trapped. The thought of continuing her life in the cold with no hope in sight gnawed at her. "Fine," she finally relented, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I'm only doing this for the money. I won't be your trophy or your joke." "Perfect," Charles exclaimed, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's get started then." As they began planning the wedding, Clara felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. She had agreed to the marriage, but she would do it on her own terms. They spent the next few days going over the details, with Charles often dismissing her ideas. "Why do you want something so simple?" he asked one afternoon, looking at the modest decorations Clara had suggested. "This is a wedding, not a charity event." "Because I want it to mean something," Clara replied, feeling her frustration boil over. "This is not just a game for me. I want to remember this day as something real." He chuckled again, shaking his head. "You're cute, Clara, but you're not thinking like a winner. This is all a facade. Nobody cares about the meaning when there's money and glamour involved." Clara felt a pang of disappointment. She had hoped, despite their circumstances, that he might understand her desire for authenticity. "You have no idea what it's like to struggle, do you?" She shot back, her voice laced with anger. "You don't know what it means to fight for every single thing you have." Charles crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "And you don't know what it's like to live in my world, to have everything handed to you and still want more. My friends will be there and they expect a show." "Then let them have their show," Clara snapped, her patience wearing thin. "I'm not playing your game, Charles. I want to do this my way." As the wedding day approached, Clara tried to push her anger aside and focus on the people she could help with the money. She envisioned a small shelter, a warm place where people could find food and comfort. She dreamed of creating a community, a place where no one felt alone. On the day of the wedding, Clara stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the simple dress she had chosen. It was nothing like the extravagant gowns Charles's friends would expect, but it felt right for her. She looked at her reflection, the woman staring back, filled with a mix of hope and dread. "Are you ready?" Charles's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to see him in a tailored suit, looking every bit the part of a wealthy man. He smirked at her, the arrogance still evident in his demeanor. "Ready as I'll ever be," Clara replied, forcing a smile. As they made their way to the grand hall, Clara felt her heart race. The opulence of the venue was overwhelming, filled with floral arrangements, crystal chandeliers, and the laughter of Charles's wealthy friends. They looked at her with a mix of amusement and disdain, their whispers barely concealed. "Look at her," one woman sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Isn't she charming?" Clara's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she held her head high. She was determined to show them that she was more than just a spectacle. As she walked down the aisle, her heart pounded in her chest. She caught glimpses of Charles's face. He was trying to conceal his excitement, but the glint in his eyes betrayed him. "Just remember, it's all a game," she told herself, trying to steady her nerves. "You're doing this for the right reasons." The ceremony began, and Clara listened to the officiant's words, a blur of vows and promises that felt hollow. She exchanged glances with Charles, who seemed more interested in the audience than in her. The weight of their situation pressed heavily on her heart. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I vow to bring light into the darkest places, to help those who feel unseen, and to stand strong against the tide of indifference." Charles's expression shifted, momentarily caught off guard by her words. But as soon as the ceremony concluded, he was back to his smug self, ready to celebrate their victory. As they left the hall, Clara felt a mix of triumph and despair. They were married, but at what cost? She was determined to make the most of the situation, even if it meant playing along with Charles's twisted game for a while longer. Little did she know, however, that the wedding night would bring unexpected revelations, shattering the illusions both had built around their lives. As the echoes of the wedding vows faded, the grand hall was filled with muted laughter and whispers, a cacophony of condescension directed at Clara. Dressed in a simple yet elegant white dress, she stood at the altar, feeling like an imposter in a world that felt foreign to her. Charles, who appeared so confident and self-assured, was surrounded by friends who reveled in the absurdity of it all. Their eyes sparkled with amusement, and Clara could sense the underlying mockery woven into their smiles. "Look at her," one of the guests whispered to another, the words laced with disdain. "He really thinks he can turn her into a trophy wife." Clara's heart raced, a mixture of embarrassment and anger flooding her senses. She had made a deal, yes, but that did not diminish her worth as a person. As Charles turned to face her, a victorious grin plastered across his face. She felt a flicker of resolve ignite within her. She was not just a pawn in his game, she was a woman with her own dreams and aspirations. "Clara, you look stunning," Charles said, his voice smooth. But Clara detected the edge of insincerity lurking beneath his compliment. It was a compliment designed to placate, not to acknowledge. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "I hope you're happy with your bet, Charles." He chuckled, a sound that felt like nails on a chalkboard to her. "Happy? Oh, I'm more than happy. This is going to be hilarious." The ceremony progressed, and Clara vowed to make the best of her situation, despite the overwhelming discomfort that enveloped her like a heavy cloak. As they exchanged rings, she caught sight of her reflection in the ornate mirror behind them, a woman transformed, yet still tethered to her reality. She was determined not to let this experience define her, even if Charles saw her as merely a means to an end. After the ceremony, the couple was ushered into a lavish reception, filled with the clinking of champagne glasses and the murmur of shallow conversations. Clara's heart sank as she watched Charles engage with his friends, their laughter ringing in her ears like an ominous bell. She felt adrift in a sea of opulence, and the weight of their judgment pressed heavily on her shoulders. "Charles, let's just take a moment to breathe," Clara suggested, feeling overwhelmed. She wanted a moment of clarity, a chance to collect her thoughts before diving into this new chapter of her life. "Breathe? Why would we do that when we can celebrate?" he replied, waving her off with a casual flick of his wrist. "You're my wife now, enjoy it." As the night wore on, Clara found herself standing alone at the edge of the dance floor, watching couples swirl around her, their laughter ringing hollow. She felt invisible, a ghost haunting the fringes of a world she didn't belong to. Suddenly, she overheard a conversation between two of Charles's friends, their voices low but audible. "Do you think he'll actually go through with it?" one asked, a smirk evident in his tone. "Of course, he's too proud to back down now," the other replied, chuckling. "This is just a bet to him. It'll be entertaining to see how long it lasts." The words struck Clara like a slap to the face. She had been nothing more than a wager, a challenge to satisfy Charles's ego. Her heart clenched painfully in her chest, and she fought back tears that threatened to spill over. Clara turned away, feeling the sting of betrayal wash over her. She had hoped for a new beginning, a chance to escape her past, but instead she felt more trapped than ever. With a deep breath, she steeled her resolve. She would not allow Charles or his friends to define her. If they saw her as a joke, she would show them the strength of her spirit. As the reception continued, Clara excused herself, retreating to a quiet balcony that overlooked the city's skyline, the twinkling lights a stark contrast to the darkness she felt within. "Clara?" Charles's voice cut through the haze of her thoughts. She turned to see him approaching, a glass of champagne in hand. "Where have you been? You're missing all the fun." "I needed a moment," she replied, her voice firm. "I didn't realize I was supposed to enjoy being the punchline of your friend's jokes." Charles's brow furrowed, and for a brief moment she saw a flicker of concern in his eyes, quickly masked by his usual arrogance. "Come on, it's not like that. They're just having a good time." "A good time at my expense?" Clara shot back, her voice rising with emotion. You think this is all just a game, don't you? He hesitated, caught off guard by her intensity. No, it's more complicated than that. Complicated how? I'm just the homeless woman you decided to marry for a laugh, she retorted, her anger boiling over. You don't see me at all, do you? Silence hung between them, heavy and charged. Charles shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her words settling in. I didn't think you'd take it so seriously, he finally said, his tone softer, almost vulnerable. Why should I not take it seriously? Clara challenged. You've turned my life upside down and I'm supposed to just smile and play along. Look, I get it. This was a stupid bet, he admitted, frustration lining his features. But now we're here and we can make the best of it. Make the best of it? Clara echoed, incredulity lacing her voice. What does that even mean to you? You're still seeing me as a pawn in your game. Clara, he began, but she cut him off. I need you to see me for who I am, not who you think I am. I'm not just some project for you to conquer. I'm a person with hopes and dreams, she implored, her heart racing as she laid her soul bare. For the first time, Charles faltered, the bravado slipping from his demeanor. What do you want, Clara? He asked, genuinely perplexed. I want respect. I want to be seen, she replied, her voice steady. I may not have your wealth, but I have my own worth. As the tension simmered, Clara's eyes locked onto Charles's, searching for something. Understanding, compassion, perhaps even a glimpse of the man she hoped lay beneath the layers of arrogance. But Charles's expression remained inscrutable, a mask of confusion and frustration. I don't know how to do that, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Then let's figure it out together, Clara suggested, her resolve hardening. But it starts with you acknowledging that I'm not just a joke. I'm not your trophy. I'm your wife. Charles stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He was used to being in control, to having the upper hand, but Clara was challenging him in a way he had never experienced before. The laughter of his friends faded into the background, replaced by the gravity of their exchange. All right, he said finally, a hint of sincerity breaking through his bravado. Let's figure it out. But this won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, Clara replied, a flicker of hope igniting within her. But I believe we can find a way forward, as long as we're honest with each other. As they stood on the balcony, the city lights shimmering like stars in the night sky, Clara felt a fragile connection forming between them, a tentative bridge over the chasm of misunderstanding that had separated their worlds. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could redefine their lives together. As the door to the lavish honeymoon suite clicked shut behind them, Clara felt the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The opulence of the room, a massive king-sized bed draped in silk, crystal chandeliers casting soft light over plush carpets, felt like a stark contrast to everything she had known. Despite the luxury surrounding her, the air was thick with tension. Charles stood by the window, arms crossed, gazing out at the city skyline as if it were a puzzle he could solve. Nice view, he remarked, his tone devoid of enthusiasm. Clara sensed a barrier between them, an invisible wall erected by his arrogance and her vulnerability. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she felt was necessary. Charles, she began, her voice trembling slightly, can we talk about us? About what this marriage means? He turned slowly, his expression a mix of impatience and curiosity. What's there to talk about? We're married. You got your money and I'm fulfilling my end of the bet. End of story. Clara's heart sank. It's not just about the money for me, you know. This is a big change in my life. I want to understand you, and I want you to understand me. Charles scoffed, shaking his head. I've made my life about success, about climbing to the top. What's there to understand about a life on the streets? It's all a matter of choices. Choices? Clara echoed, a fire igniting within her. You think I chose to live on the streets? You think I woke up one day and decided I wanted to be homeless? Life doesn't always give us choices, Charles. Sometimes it's about survival. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of condescension creeping into his voice. You talk about survival like it's some noble struggle, but I've built my life on hard work, on ambition. I don't see how your struggles give you any kind of insight into success." Clara's frustration boiled over. Success? Is that all you care about? What about happiness? What about kindness? I've seen people who have nothing but are happier than those drowning in wealth. You're so blinded by your ambition that you can't even see the worth in people who don't have what you do. Charles's expression hardened and he shot back, "And what do you know about wealth, Clara? You've been out there on the streets, but you don't understand the sacrifices that come with success. You don't understand the pressure, the expectations." "You're right. I don't understand your kind of pressure," she replied, her voice steadying. "But I do understand the pressure of survival, the pressure of waking up every day wondering where your next meal will come from or if you'll be safe at night. That's a different kind of weight, Charles." He turned away, running a hand through his hair in frustration. The silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Clara took a moment to collect her thoughts, feeling the sting of tears in her eyes. She didn't want to cry in front of him. She didn't want to show any weakness. But the memories of her struggles crept back in, unbidden. "I just want you to see me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just the woman you picked for a bet. I want you to know who I am, what I've been through. I want you to understand that I'm more than just a pawn in your game." Charles shifted, his expression softening for the briefest of moments. But just as quickly he masked it with indifference. "This isn't about you or me. It's about winning. That's what matters, right?" He tried to sound nonchalant, but Clara could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Feeling defeated, Clara turned away and walked to the balcony. The city sprawled below her, illuminated by thousands of lights, each one a reminder of the life she had left behind. She could hear the distant sounds of laughter and music, people celebrating life, while she felt like a ghost haunting the edges of a world she didn't belong to. As she stood there, tears finally spilled down her cheeks. She tried to wipe them away quickly, but the sobs came unbidden. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone, even standing next to the man she had married. "Clara." Charles's voice broke through her haze of despair, and she turned to see him stepping closer, uncertainty etched on his face. "I didn't mean to..." "Didn't mean to what?" she interrupted, anger flaring again. "Didn't mean to make me feel small? Didn't mean to strip away my dignity? You don't get it, do you? You think this is just a game." "I'm just..." he started, but she cut him off again. "Just what? Trying to win a bet? Trying to prove a point? You're so wrapped up in your own world that you can't see how your actions affect others." For a moment, Charles looked as if he might argue back, but the fire in her eyes seemed to catch him off guard. Instead, he fell silent, the weight of her words settling heavily in the air between them. Clara turned back to the view, her heart racing as she fought against the tide of emotions threatening to pull her under. She could hear him moving behind her, a shuffle of footsteps as he pondered his next words. "Look," he finally said, his voice quieter, more contemplative. "I didn't mean for this to turn into a fight. I thought you'd just enjoy the perks of being with me. I didn't realize..." "Exactly," Clara shot back, spinning around to face him. "You didn't realize. You never took the time to understand who I am. And now, here we are, married, and you still see me as a trophy or a challenge." Charles ran a hand over his face, frustration morphing into something more vulnerable. "I've never had to think about these things. My world is about numbers and competition. I didn't expect this." "Then maybe you should start," Clara replied, her tone softening as she saw a glimmer of genuine conflict in his expression. "Maybe you should start seeing the world beyond your own narrow view, because if you don't, you'll miss out on everything that truly matters." The silence enveloped them again, heavier this time, filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Clara could feel her heart pounding, not just from the argument, but from the flicker of something she couldn't quite define, the possibility that beneath his arrogance there might be an opportunity for growth, for understanding. As she turned back to the cityscape, a sigh escaped her lips. "I didn't come into this wanting to change you, Charles. I just want to be seen as I am, not just a means to an end." Charles took a deep breath and she could hear the struggle in his voice when he spoke again. I'm not used to this, to feeling challenged. I'm used to being in control." "Control isn't everything," Clara replied, her heart aching for him even as she felt the weight of her own struggles. "Sometimes, letting go is more powerful than holding on tight." In that moment, Clara didn't know what the future held for them, but she could feel the fragile threads of understanding beginning to weave between their hearts. It was a small flicker of hope, but in the world they inhabited, anything was possible. The sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains of their luxurious honeymoon suite, casting a warm glow over the room. Clara stirred awake, feeling a surge of determination coursing through her. Today would be different. She had endured enough condescension and judgment from Charles and his friends. It was time to show him a glimpse of the beauty found in humility and kindness. With a resolve to bridge their disparate worlds, she turned to him, still asleep beside her, his face softened in slumber. "Charles," she whispered, gently shaking his shoulder. He groaned, shifting away from her touch. "Charles, wake up. I have an idea." He opened one eye, squinting in the brightness. "What is it?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "I think we should volunteer at a local shelter today," she suggested, her voice steady, infused with hope. "It would be a great way to give back, and I think it might help you understand my world a little better." He frowned, his brow furrowing in skepticism. "A shelter? Why would I want to spend my day there? I don't even know where one is." Clara felt a pang of disappointment, but pressed on. "There's a wonderful place not far from here. They help the homeless in our city, providing meals and support. Please just give it a chance. I think it could really open your eyes." Charles sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Fine," he relented, his voice laced with reluctance. "But only because you're so insistent. I don't see what good it will do, but whatever." Clara's heart fluttered with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She quickly dressed and waited in the living room, her mind racing with possibilities. Perhaps today would be the day he began to see her, not as a pawn in his cruel bet, but as an individual with her own dreams and aspirations. As they arrived at the shelter, Clara's spirit was infectious. She stepped inside, inhaling the familiar scent of coffee and baked bread. The walls were adorned with cheerful artwork created by the residents, and the atmosphere buzzed with a sense of community. Clara smiled warmly at the staff, who greeted her with open arms. "Clara, so good to see you," a woman with a kind face exclaimed, pulling her into a hug. "Are you here to help again?" "Absolutely, Rebecca. I brought my husband along today," Clara beamed, gesturing to Charles, who stood awkwardly by the entrance, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Rebecca's smile faded slightly as she noticed Charles's demeanor. "Oh, it's nice to meet you," she said, extending her hand. "We can always use an extra pair of hands. Are you ready to get to work?" Charles hesitated, glancing around at the bustling activity, the laughter of children, the conversations among volunteers and residents. He sensed the palpable energy of the place, but struggled to understand its significance. "Sure," he replied, his voice lacking enthusiasm. Clara watched him closely, hoping to see even a flicker of interest spark in his eyes. As they began to sort donations, Clara's natural warmth and ability to connect with others shone through. She engaged with everyone around her, listening to their stories, sharing smiles and offering encouragement. Each interaction seemed to light her up from within, and Charles couldn't help but notice the joy she radiated. "Why do you care so much about them?" he muttered under his breath, organizing clothes with a lack of finesse. "They're just homeless people." Clara paused, her expression shifting from delight to disappointment. "They're not just homeless people, Charles. They're individuals with their own battles, their own stories. Everyone deserves compassion and understanding, regardless of their circumstances." He scoffed, shaking his head. "You act like they're all saints. Some of them are probably just lazy." "Just because they're struggling doesn't mean they're not worthy of respect," Clara countered, her voice steady. "You have no idea what some of these people have gone through. You see them as less than human, but I see their strength and resilience." Charles crossed his arms, a defensive gesture. "You make it sound so simple. You can't fix everyone's problems, Clara." "I'm not trying to fix them," she replied passionately. "I'm just trying to show them that someone cares, that they're not alone in this fight." As the day progressed, Clara dove into her work, organizing food parcels, serving meals, and engaging with the residents. Charles, despite his reluctance, found himself drawn to her enthusiasm. He watched her interact with a group of children, their laughter ringing like music through the air. She was radiant, and for the first time, he felt a pang of something he hadn't expected to feel: admiration. "Can you help me with this?" a young boy asked Clara, holding out a handful of crayons and a coloring book. "I can't reach the table." "Of course." Clara knelt beside him, her eyes sparkling as she guided him on how to color within the lines. Charles observed the scene, the warmth between them undeniable, and felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his chest. Was it envy? As the shelter buzzed with activity, he found himself drawn into conversations with residents, albeit reluctantly. An older man shared his story of losing everything in a fire, and Charles found himself nodding along, though he tried to maintain his aloofness. The man's resilience was admirable, and Charles couldn't help but feel a sense of respect for someone who had endured so much, yet still found a reason to smile. After hours of volunteering, Clara was exhausted yet exhilarated. "Did you see how happy they were?" she asked Charles, her eyes shining with joy. "We made a difference today." "Yeah, I guess so," he replied, attempting to mask his growing awareness of the impact of their efforts. "But it's just one day. What about tomorrow? What about the day after that?" "Every little bit helps," Clara insisted, her voice firm. "It's about building connections and showing kindness. It's not just a one-time thing, it's about creating a ripple effect." He nodded slowly, but the weight of his previous belief still clung to him like a shadow. The glimmer of hope that Clara had ignited in him began to flicker, battling against the arrogance that had long defined him. As they left the shelter, the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the city. Clara's laughter echoed in his ears, and for a moment he felt a warmth spreading through him, a feeling he had long since buried beneath layers of wealth and pride. "Thank you for coming with me today," Clara said sincerely, turning to him with a soft smile. "I know it wasn't easy for you." Charles shrugged, feigning indifference but unable to suppress a small smile of his own. "It wasn't the worst thing I've ever done." Clara chuckled, her heart swelling with hope. "That's progress, I'll take it. Maybe we can do this again?" "Maybe," he replied, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Deep down, he felt the stirrings of something he hadn't anticipated, a growing desire to truly understand her world, to see beyond the facade of wealth and arrogance he had constructed around himself. As they walked back to their hotel, the streets glimmering with the fading light, Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps today had been the start of something new, not just for her, but for Charles as well. She held on to the hope that the walls he had built around his heart might begin to crumble, revealing the potential for connection and love that lay beneath. "Just think, if you can see the beauty in this, maybe you can start to see it in other places too," she encouraged, looking up at him. He glanced down at her, his expression a mixture of contemplation and uncertainty. "Maybe," he echoed, the word lingering in the air, heavy with possibility. As they stepped into the hotel, Clara could feel the shift in the atmosphere between them, a tentative bridge slowly forming over the chasm that once separated their worlds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the luxurious hotel suite, Clara felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety bubbling inside her. It was their last night of honeymoon, and she had planned a surprise that she hoped would bridge the chasm between her and Charles. She glanced over at him, sitting on the plush sofa, his expression a mix of boredom and irritation as he scrolled through his phone, oblivious to the world around him. "Charles?" Clara said, her voice steady but filled with a hint of nervousness. "I have something important to share with you tonight." He looked up, arching an eyebrow. "What is it now? More charity work? Because I'm really not in the mood." "No, it's not about that," she insisted, biting her lip. "It's about my past. I want you to meet someone who means a lot to me." Charles leaned back, crossing his arms defensively. "Is it one of your homeless friends? Because I'm really not interested in hearing more sob stories." "Please," she pleaded, her heart racing. "This is different. It's crucial for you to understand where I come from. It's not just about the streets. It's about who I was before everything changed." He hesitated, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "Fine. Who are we meeting?" Clara smiled softly, relieved. "You'll see. Just trust me." A few hours later, they found themselves in the hotel's elegant lounge, a space adorned with crystal chandeliers and plush seating. Clara's pulse quickened as she spotted the familiar figure sitting in the corner. The elderly woman, with silver hair and kind eyes, was wrapped in a cozy shawl, her presence instantly bringing back a rush of memories. "Mom?" Clara called out, her voice trembling slightly. The woman looked up, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Clara," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. Clara rushed towards her mother, enveloping her in a warm embrace. "It's been so long," she murmured, tears streaming down her cheeks. As they held each other tightly, the years of separation melted away, revealing a bond that time could not sever. Charles stood at a distance, his heart pounding as he witnessed this emotional reunion. He felt an unfamiliar pang of discomfort, watching the raw vulnerability between them. He cleared his throat, trying to reclaim his composure. "So you're Clara's mother?" he said, attempting to sound casual. "Yes," the woman replied, pulling away from Clara to wipe her tears. She looked at Charles, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "And you must be the one she married?" "Yes, I am," he replied, his tone clipped. "Charles." "What a lovely name," she said, her voice warm but laced with an underlying tension. "Clara has told me about you." "Has she?" He shifted uncomfortably, not wanting to delve into the details of their bet. "Yes," her mother continued, looking at Clara with a mixture of pride and sadness. "She's always been a fighter, you know. Even when we lost everything, she refused to let go of her dreams." Clara nodded, her heart swelling with a mix of love and regret. "I had to, Mum. I wanted to prove that I could survive on my own, despite everything." Charles felt a wave of confusion wash over him. This wasn't the narrative he had expected. He had assumed Clara was a mere pawn in his bet, a homeless woman with no history worth mentioning. But here she was, a woman reclaiming her past, her spirit unbroken. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, trying to mask his surprise. "About your family." "I was ashamed," she admitted, wiping her tears. "When we fell from grace, I didn't want anyone to know. I thought it would be easier to start over without the baggage of my past." Charles watched her, his mind racing. The woman he had dismissed as unworthy was layered with experiences and emotions he had failed to see. This was not just a game, it was a life intertwined with complexities he had never considered. "What happened to your family?" he asked, his tone softening slightly. Clara took a deep breath, steadied by her mother's presence. "After my father lost his job, everything spiraled out of control. We lost our home, and Mom struggled to keep us afloat. I thought I could help by moving out, thinking it would relieve some of the burden." Her mother nodded in agreement. "It was a hard time for us all. I never wanted Clara to feel like she had to carry that weight alone." Charles felt a stirring of empathy, a feeling he had long buried under layers of arrogance and pride. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. Clara turned to him, searching his eyes for understanding. "That's why I wanted you to meet my mum. I want you to see that I am more than just a bet. I have dreams, a history, and a family that loves me." As the words hung in the air, Charles's facade began to crack. He realized that Clara represented something far beyond his initial assumptions. She was a woman of strength, resilience, and depth, qualities he had long overlooked in his pursuit of wealth and status. "Clara, he started, but the words caught in his throat. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if his entire worldview was crumbling before him. "I never saw you like that." "I know," she replied softly. "But I need you to understand that I'm not just a pawn in your game. I'm a person with feelings, dreams, and a history that matters." Her mother chimed in, her voice gentle yet firm. "Charles, Clara deserves respect. She has fought her way through life, and I hope you can see the incredible woman she is." Charles looked between the two of them, his heart racing. The weight of his arrogance pressed heavily on his chest, forcing him to confront the reality he had chosen to ignore. "I've been so blinded by my own pride," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought money could solve everything, but now I see how wrong I was." Clara's eyes sparkled with hope, and for the first time, he saw the woman he had married, a woman who radiated strength and beauty from within. "It's not too late, Charles," she said, her voice steady. "You have the chance to change, to truly see the world through a different lens." As they sat together, the three of them, the room filled with an awkward but hopeful silence. Charles felt a flicker of realization ignite within him. He had the power to embrace this new perspective, to let go of his preconceived notions about love and wealth. "Clara," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I want to understand you. I want to understand us." With that, Clara reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "That's all I've ever wanted, Charles, for you to see me for who I truly am." In that moment, surrounded by the remnants of their pasts and the promise of their future, Charles realized that love was not about wealth or status. It was about connection, understanding, and the willingness to change. As the evening wore on, he knew that he stood at a crossroads, facing the opportunity to embrace a new life, one filled with love, empathy, and the chance for redemption.